The 17-year-old founder of Subway had never made a sub sandwich in his life, and his first restaurant failed miserably. So how did Subway overtake McDonald's and become the biggest fast food chain in the entire world? This is a story of both struggles and success, a tale of lawsuits and lies. This is the controversial history of Subway. In 1965, 17-year-old Fred DeLuca wanted to become a doctor, but he had a problem. He was the son of poor Italian-American immigrants and earned just $1.25 an hour at a hardware store. So he had no idea how he was going to pay for medical school. He'd grown up in public housing in the Bronx, and his family barely had enough money to scrape by. But then one day Fred and his parents got invited to a barbecue at the house of an old family friend, a nuclear physicist named Peter Buck. From the size of his house, it was clear that Peter was well off, and so Fred decided to ask him how he could make enough money for college, secretly hoping Peter might give him a loan. Instead, Peter's answer was not what he expected. Peter said, "You should open a submarine sandwich shop." Now, couple of issues here. Number one, Fred had no money. Number two, he'd literally never made a sub sandwich in his life. But Peter explained how it would be pretty simple. Open a small store, build a counter, and then buy some different fillings and bread. Peter had actually had this idea for a while, but didn't have time to run it himself. So he said they could be business partners. Fred would run the day-to-day management of the store, and Peter would give him a $1,000 loan to get started. This was not how Fred had expected this family barbecue to go, but he was now in business. Unfortunately, it was a business he knew absolutely nothing about. But still, in 1965, 17-year-old Fred used that initial loan from his new business partner, along with some help from his mother, to open his first sandwich shop. It was located in Bridgeport, Connecticut, although originally it wasn't called Subway. They named it Pete's Super Submarines. To drum up interest in their launch, Fred handed out flyers all across the local area, and on the first day of trading, they sold 312 sandwiches, costing less than $1 each. Unfortunately, after the initial hype in the first couple of weeks, sales started to fall. To make matters worse, when Fred spent money to run some local radio ads, potential customers couldn't even properly understand them because of his heavy Brooklyn accent. Fred's lack of business experience meant their sandwich shop was failing. In fact, by the end of Fred's first summer of running Pete's Super Submarines, he had just $6. For many people, this would be the point where the story ends. The business closes and they move on. But not for Fred and Peter. Instead, they made an extremely bold business move. Despite their first store in Bridgeport clearly not going well at all, they decided to open another restaurant to create the image of success. They figured if they had multiple locations, people would assume they must be doing really well and have great products. It was also around this point in 1968 when they rebranded to the much shorter and simpler name, Subway. Peter and Fred were so adamant the idea could work, they set themselves an ambitious goal of opening 32 Subways in the next 10 years. Both of them believed the key to success was visibility and marketing, so they made sure their next Subway restaurants were much more visible, prominent locations. This led them to their first profitable year, earning $7,000. Not a lot of money considering the work they put in, but proved this business could be profitable. So they continued to reinvest money into opening more locations and advertising. Subway was on the up, and their persistence was paying off. By 1974, this unlikely duo had grown from a single failing sandwich store to 16 different Subway branches throughout Connecticut. However, their expansion had caused a problem. Each of their restaurants were quite inconsistent in how they looked and operated. Depending on which Subway restaurant you visited, the experience could be very different, as they couldn't properly manage them all. And there was also another problem. They'd originally set a goal of 32 restaurants in 10 years, and with only 2 years left on that target, they were only halfway there. It would be impossible to hit their goal at this current rate. And then Fred had an idea that could solve both of these problems and make them more money for much less work. And it was this idea that ultimately transformed Subway into the biggest fast food restaurant on the planet. Fred wondered if instead of directly owning and managing their future Subway restaurants themselves, what if they franchised and let other driven entrepreneurs have their own Subway restaurant which they were fully focused on, but that followed the exact same format and menu that had been successful with their first 16 locations. This way, Fred and Peter didn't have to worry about operating their own restaurants and dealing with customers, staff, and suppliers themselves. Other people would pay to set up a Subway restaurant and use all the Subway branding and products. This is when Peter's role in the business started to get even smaller. He became a silent partner and didn't even have his own office at Subway HQ. If someone asked him a question about the business, he would famously say, "Talk to Fred." Peter did continue to take his share of the profits though, earning him an incredible return on his initial $1,000 investment. But still, once Fred and Peter agreed to franchise Subway in 1974, they managed to get 15 franchisees signed up that year. And by 1981, they'd gone national, opening 200 locations across the United States and 100 more the following year. This growth was much faster than what they'd been able to achieve by doing everything themselves. Franchising was clearly the way forward for Subway and is how the business has been run ever since. It helped that in the 80s and 90s, Subway franchises were one of the cheapest to set up, costing a fraction of the amount it takes to set up a McDonald's, Taco Bell, or Wendy's that need more expensive equipment. Unlike those fast food chains, Subway wanted its franchise locations to be fast to build, cheap to run, and in convenient, sometimes unconventional locations. You can find Subways in petrol stations, airports, post offices, hospitals, universities, and even on military bases. It gets weirder too. A fake Virginia town built by the FBI to train its agents is home to a very real Subway. There's an entirely kosher Subway in a Jewish community center in Ohio, and you can even get your hands on a footlong in a German river cruise ship. For Subway, no location is too strange or small. It'll open a franchise virtually anywhere, and this enabled them to expand more rapidly than competitors. And remember, Fred and Peter not only got an upfront fee for every new franchisee, they also got 8% ongoing royalties of all the money the franchise made. At its peak, Fred was receiving checks worth roughly $7 million every Monday, which were his royalties from all the different Subway stores. However, whilst this franchise model was proving great for Fred and Peter, for the franchisees actually running Subway shops, things were not so great. Fred had an extremely hands-on approach and was known for micromanaging his franchisees. In fact, it's claimed Fred had no personal boundaries at all and reportedly felt like he could come onto the wives of franchisee owners at Subway conventions because he believed their husband's success was all down to him. One business associate claimed if you wore a skirt and had a pulse, he would chase you. Meanwhile, many franchise owners had accused the company of defrauding them or tricking them into binding, uncompromising contracts. In 1998, 40% of Subway franchise owners said they were just getting by and making a few dollars. Part of the problem is that Fred was so keen to expand Subway and open more stores that it was very common for them to set up multiple Subways in a small area, making it very difficult for one restaurant to make much profit because there was just too much competition. When asked about this, Fred said, "It bothers me that people lose money, but I don't lose sleep over it. This is America." The Subway sales team who signed up new franchisees also seemed to be quite targeted in their sales approach. A former Subway executive said 30 to 50% of franchisees are immigrants, and many struggled to understand the complex contracts they were signing because they were written in their second or third language. When one Subway exec suggested maths and English comprehension tests to check franchisees fully knew what they were signing up for, Subway's management rejected the idea. For many of Subway's sales executives, all that mattered was signing up more and more franchisees. It didn't matter if those people understood the risks and costs they were taking on. One ex-Subway employee even said, "I've seen over 300 franchise agreements, and Subway's is the worst." In fact, some of the contract terms were even declared illegal in certain US states. It gave Fred the power to seize any franchise and its assets if he wanted to, stated he could set up franchises close together, making the restaurants fight each other for business, and banned franchise owners from ever talking to the media. In 2017, some Subway franchises decided to break this rule and told Business Insider that Subway's slogan "Eat Fresh" was far from true. The ingredients they were forced to order only arrived once a week, leading to mushy and rotten vegetables. If they tried